Hello. Today is Wednesday of the second week of Advent. The two candles in the Advent wreath are lit, and we're continuing Ishtar's Odyssey by Arnold Itrida. Today's chapter is titled Outpost. Ishtar could not believe he'd just been insulted to his face. He was about to tell the dirty and ragged boy just who he was when Nami's father held up his hand. "Forgive, my son," he said with a bow. "We are a distant outpost, and we see mostly the rough and crude men of the trading caravans. We are not used to such refined people as yourselves." "No offense is taken," Salamar said. "Correct, Ishtar?" Ishtar wanted to say that he took great offense, but knew that was not what his father expected. "No offense, father," he said. "Now, the matter of payment for use of your well," Salamar continued to Moez. "I know you are a shrewd trader and hard negotiator for your village, but I want you to know that I am too, and we will pay not 1 grain more than 15 sacks for the right to water our entire caravan." "15 sacks!" Ishtar yelled. "But father, that is—" He stopped talking when his father shot him a sharp look. "That is very shrewd of you," Ishtar finished. "And we shall need enough salt for our animals for a month. 5 more sacks of grain." Moez scratched his beard as if considering the offer. "Are you sure I cannot bargain you out of a few more sacks?" Salamar shook his head. Moez sighed and then said, "Agreed." At that moment Varta arrived with her bag of millet. While everyone was paying attention to her, Ishtar whispered to Salamar, "Father, 15 sacks is 3 times more." Salamar held up his hand, and Ishtar knew to be quiet. "Excuse the interruption," Varta said, "but Ishtar must have his dinner." "Dinner," Nami said. "But the sun just came up. It is time for breaking fast." "Our days are backwards," Salamar explained. "We travel at night and sleep in the day." Varta poured Ishtar's millet. Having no locust handy to put in the slop, Ishtar held his nose and drank it down. Moez and Nami both stared at the empty cup. "Perhaps Nami and his father would like to share in your dinner," Salamar said to Ishtar. "I would not wish that on my nastiest enemy," Ishtar said. But Varta poured another cupful and handed it to Nami. Nami gulped it down with great pleasure, as did Moez a moment later. "I have not had such a wonderful breakfast in many days," Nami said, wiping his mouth. "You think that was wonderful?" Ishtar gasped. Salamar decided it was time to change the subject. "Moez, let's talk in the comfort of my tent." "Excellent," Moez said. Then to his son, "Nami, show Ishtar around Zelzele." "Yes, father," Nami answered. Ishtar followed Nami across the camp and into the town, with Kazim close behind, even though it was his turn to rest. Zelzele was a town of about 200 houses, all built on the side of a hill that overlooked the desert for many miles in every direction. Many of the buildings were connected so that if you wanted to get to a house in the middle, you'd have to go through 5 or 6 other houses to get there. The thick mud walls leaned precariously under roofs formed by wooden boards covered by palm branches. Most of the narrow streets were more like paths and had a roof over them to provide shade from the harsh sun. Everywhere they went, there were stairs going this way and that, some crumbling to rubble. "I can't wait to get away from this dry, dirty place," Ishtar thought. "Would you like to be my friend?" Nami's question startled Ishtar. "Ah, of course," he said, though he wasn't really sure. He'd never in his life had a friend except Kazim and his cousins, but they don't count because they're family, Ishtar thought. I'll show you the whole city, Nami said, and Ishtar thought he seemed awfully excited. They walked up and down the steep and narrow streets. Why is your town called Zelzele? The word meant earthquake, and Ishtar couldn't figure out why anyone would name a town that. Nami looked at Ishtar as if he'd just claimed to be a camel. Do you not see? He asked. Ishtar finally realized and felt as dumb as a brick. This town was destroyed by an earthquake. Nami nodded. But what was its name before that? No one knows, Nami answered. It fell many centuries ago. Then my father's grandfather settled here and gave it its new name. Back then, water flowed freely, and there was a great oasis here. Well, why not move to someplace better? Ishtar asked. Nami shrugged. It is home. Suddenly Nami stopped and spun toward Ishtar. Home? It is the noon hour. You must come to my home for the midday meal, he said. Nami led them up a particularly twisted street, barely wide enough for Kazim's broad shoulders. Then they ducked down into a dark hole in the wall. Inside, when his eyes finally adjusted, Ishtar saw that the hole was Nami's home. A single room with a fire pit in the middle and bed sacks around the outside. The only light in the room filtered through the palm branches of the roof. There were several children playing with sticks and rocks and one little rag doll. These are my 3 little sisters and 2 little brothers, Nami said of the children. And this is my mother, he added, pointing to a woman stirring the fire. Mother, this is my new friend Ishtar. He is a prince of all Persia. Nami's mother raised her eyebrows in surprise and said, Welcome to our home, young prince. Please stay and take your noon meal with us. I would be most honored, Ishtar said. His stomach had been protesting the lack of food ever since they left the first oasis weeks ago, he realized. It would be good to have a real meal. Nami seemed very proud to give his new friend a tour of the one-room house while his mother cooked, though Ishtar didn't think the place was fit for even Musa to sleep. This is my bed, Nami said, pointing to one of the flat bags filled with straw. And this is my pet giraffe, he added, holding up a piece of cloth that had been knotted into something resembling a giraffe. His name is Musa. Musa is the name of my camel, Ishtar said, and Nami laughed. My father says that only the Romans name their animals. Ishtar looked at Kazim as he answered Nami. That's what some people have told me, too. Nami's mother called them to eat, and they all sat around the little cooking fire, except for Kazim, who stood by the door. Nami's mother sat with her back to Kazim, and Ishtar sat looking at her from across the fire pit. The other children filled in around them. Ishtar looked at the meal and thought, This is ridiculous. On the pan over the fire were 9 tiny, lifeless pieces of flatbread and 3 even smaller pieces of meat. The meat is for our guests, Nami's mother said. Then she prayed to the gods a blessing over the food, and Ishtar thought that if they really were gods, they'd be able to multiply the food and help his starving friends. But when she was done, there remained only the pitifully small portions on the grill. Nami's brothers and sisters each snatched their piece of bread and shoved it in their mouths. In moments, it was gone, barely a single bite. I had a most wonderful cup of millet this morning, Nami said, and I am still full. He handed his piece of bread to his mother. And I require no food, Kazim said from where he stood. Nami's mother took those 2 pieces of bread, tore them in 2, and gave them to the 4 youngest children. I am not so hungry myself, she said, giving half her piece of bread to the 5th child. All that was left on the flat cooking pan were the 3 pieces of meat and the 1 piece of bread. Ishtar's stomach was still screaming from hunger, But his heart was hurting even more. The faces of the 5 small children were all looking at him, and he knew they were starving. I I have eaten far too much on this journey, he said. Please take. At that moment he saw Kazim shaking his head quickly with wide open eyes. He was mouthing the words, "No, you must eat." Ishtar stopped in mid-sentence and then realized there must be some rule of etiquette involved. He didn't know which one, but he knew better than to violate it. Please take my most humble thanks for this wonderful meal, he said. And Kazim nodded and smiled. Then, feeling terribly guilty, and with his heart still hurting as the hungry children watched, he ate all of the meat and bread, making sure to look as if it were the finest banquet he had ever attended. Ishtar could still see the faces of the starving children in his mind's eye as he, Nami, and Kazim walked back to the caravan. He saw that about half the camels had been watered and half the bags filled from the only well in the city, and wondered what was taking so long. "Father," Ishtar called as they entered Salamar's tent, "may I speak with you?" Salamar excused himself from Moez and followed Ishtar to the other end of the tent. "Father, I know now why you overpaid for the water," Ishtar whispered, "but it is not enough. We must give Moez many more sacks of grain." Salamar smiled. "Your heart is good and kind," he said, "but we cannot. I gave Moez as much as I thought we could, and still make it seem a fee for the water and salt. Any more would be seen as charity, and that would be an insult." "But his children are starving." "Yes, I know. But 20 sacks of grain will give them good nourishment for many months." He stopped and looked at Ishtar for several moments, waiting to see if his son would see his plan, and then added, "Many months, until we travel through here on our way home and need water and salt again." Ishtar smiled. "I see my father is more devious than I knew." "Perhaps you will someday learn that your father knows a great deal more than you think he does." Ignoring that remark, Ishtar spoke even softer. "Father, I know that the 11th year of my birth is soon to pass, and I know that even on a caravan in the middle of the desert you would not let it pass without a celebration." "And so," Salamar answered, "what thought is filling your head?" Ishtar cleared his throat. "I would like to ask you for a very special birthday gift this year." And his next words surprised even Salamar. Compassion is a hard thing to learn. It means genuinely caring for someone else who is hurt or has a need. Compassion requires us to be more concerned for the other person than we are for our own needs and desires. It requires us to let go of our selfishness. The only life Ishtar has ever known has been the life of rich foods, royal palaces, and servants. But when faced with people in terrible hunger, he finally realizes that he has had it easy while other people suffer. And it hurts him so much that he wants to change. He wants to give up his selfishness. Can we do that? Can we stop worrying about ourselves and put the needs of others ahead of our own? Can we learn compassion